the way that we know is because of that accent pattern. And this means that for one reason or another, rice to touch their corn and Southeast Asia, that is one way that a language might be. Very, very pairy of prefixes and suffixes. Then there are languages which are called agglutinative languages. And as you can guess, it's because they agglutinate their morphemes. And Swahili is one of these. And so you can in this lecture, we're going to proceed to the next level of language structure, which is called syntax. And so we have seen sounds. We've seen how sounds make up morphemes. And morphemes make up words. And words come together in sentences. And in linguistics, syntax is the study of how that process works. And for our purposes, the crucial insight is that syntax is not just a matter of learning to put words in the proper order. There is more going on from where sentences begin to how they actually come out than we might think. And so this is just like the other levels of language that we've seen in the course so far. And so there's the phonetic distinction in terms of sounds, and we've seen that words are actually a matter of conglomerations of morphemes in ways that you might not think about. And in the same way, with syntax, there's what underlies and then what is on the surface. And so we're going to take a look at how syntax works in linguistics over this and the next two lectures. In this one, the first thing I want to do is give a little bit of history of this way of looking at syntax. And then I want to introduce you to some of the basic tools in terms of how this kind of thing is studied in the academic linguistic field. So first, a little bit of history. What am I talking about? Syntax. And why am I using that particular term? The fact of the matter is that phonology and morphology, in the ways that I've described it to you so far in this course, were pretty well established in recognizable forms by the 1920s. So these are relatively old things. But when it came to studying something like word order, this was something which was not done a whole lot. One of the oddest things about looking at a description of a language written in, say, 1910 is how little interest there often is in anything beyond phonology and morphology. So that there isn't anything else to be studied or not studied very closely. And there were two reasons for this. For one thing, if you were a linguist in, say, 1915, what you really were was a flavor of anthropologist. And an anthropologist at this time, just like now, but this was a new paradigm for anthropology at this time, was committed to showing that there is no such thing as an inferior culture. And so to take a song from the aughts, the first decade of the 20th century, there was a very popular song that was supposed to be about a Zulu from Matabulu and how he would sing a love song. And it went, if you like a me like a you, and we like a both the same. So that was the idea of what a native was. So either you were a civilized first world person, or you had a bone through your nose, or you can even look at old Looney Tunes. And the native is somebody who
Oh,
yells boonga boonga boonga, and you get the feeling that the language is more primitive, but it only seems to have one word, and so on. That was the view that anthropologists were newly committed to fighting in, say, 1915. And so, for example, we saw how Edward Sapir noticed in terms of languages that Plato's language, his ancient Greek, was similar in structure to the language of a swineherd from Macedonia, and that the language of Confucius was similar in structure to, quote unquote, the headhunter from Assam. This was the sort of idea one worked under. Another main promoter of that idea was Franz Boas. And so these were people who were linguists as well. And if you were a linguist, you were committed to this idea that there are just cultures of equal value. Language was seen as something that comes from culture, and of course it does. And so the idea was how the words are put in order, just like everything else in language, is just something chance that happened at a particular time in a particular place, maybe for cultural reasons, but that there's nothing systematic to be studied about it. Certainly, there's nothing that we can say about which language has which words in what order and how these differences might mean something in the grander sense. It's just cultural. And in addition, this was a time when psychologists were under the influence of behaviorism. And the general idea in behaviorism was that anything that human beings do is a learned kind of behavior. You start out as a blank slate, as a tabula rasa, and you watch people doing things, and that's why you do them. And this supposedly would include language. And so it's just a matter of what you've picked up. It would not be a matter of there being any kind of underlying system in the way that we've seen how phonemes work and how they come out as allophones or how morphemes come together into words. The idea was that it was just a matter of culture. So linguists basically describe the language's phonemes and allophones, and then you describe some morphemes, and then we wait for them to describe sentence structure, or at least the linguist waits, and then it kind of just stops. They say a few things, next thing you know, you're in the index, and then you shut the book, and it's gone. That is something that was changed by Noam Chomsky. Now, Noam Chomsky, of course, is best known to most people for his political views and his political writing. But he actually has led a kind of double life, because Noam Chomsky also founded the main perspectives of how traditional linguistics is done today. He's considered the grandfather of the field. So for every political book that he puts out, a political statement that he's known for, there's something he's done within the world of linguistics which is considered equally important. And Chomsky, starting when he was just an undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania, hit upon a different way of looking at what syntax was. And so instead of it being a matter of each language just happens to have a certain way of putting words in order for reasons that aren't particularly important and are probably tied up with local cultures, he thought, it looks to me as if languages' word order patterns have certain things in common, which suggest that there is some kind of mental hardwiring that is innate to human beings, and that is all human beings, which allows us to generate sentences, as he put it, which determines what the word order is in different languages. His idea is that it's not cultural, that there is something actually imprinted in our brains, that there's actually something in our DNA that codes for the ability to use and process the syntax of language. His idea was that even if all of the 6,000 languages of the world's word order look very different, it must be that all of them are actually variant expressions of a single template that we are actually born with the ability to use. That is not an idea that anyone had had before. I
and
myself sometimes wonder how anybody, particularly as an undergraduate, when I at least was busy doing all sorts of other things, would sit and look at all of the different syntaxes of the world and come to the conclusion that, wow, we must be born with syntax encoded in the neurons in our brain. That's what Chomsky did, however, and he has promulgated that idea very prominently for a very long time now. The official salvo was his book Syntactic Structures, and that was in 1957. And there was a revolution of sorts in the study of linguistics. Suddenly, by only about 10 years later, syntactic structures was the way most people studying syntax were looking at things, and people, for a very long time now. The official salvo was his book Syntactic Structures, and that was in 1957. And there was a revolution of sorts in the study of linguistics. Suddenly, by only about 10 years later, syntactic structures was the way most people studying syntax were looking at things, and the people who had done the old-fashioned kind of linguistics suddenly seemed like pipe-smoking people in tweed jackets with 3